During a crowded Sunday service, Mama Elisheba gripped Pastor Gideon's hand too tightly while smiling at the congregation. Her fingers dug into his palm like sharp thorns piercing soft flesh. She leaned close to his ear, her breath hot against his skin, and whispered words that burned hotter than fire. Say the wrong word today during your sermon and you will regret it deeply. I promise you that. Her smile never wavered for even a second. The congregation saw only a devoted wife supporting her husband lovingly. They saw her touching his shoulder gently. They saw her nodding at his words approvingly. But Gideon felt something entirely different. His throat tightened with each breath. His hands trembled slightly as he held the Bible. Sweat formed on his forehead, though the church was cool. Why does a pastor, a man of God, who should fear nothing but the Lord himself, fear his own wife? What kind of power does she hold over him? What secret hide behind that perfect smile she wears so easily? Behind closed doors, away from the eyes of the admiring congregation, Elisheba controlled the home with scripture twisted like rope and silence heavy as stone. She quoted Bible verses about submission and obedience constantly, but only to Gideon, never to herself. He ate his meals last after she had taken the best portions for herself. He spoke very little, choosing silence over punishment. He slept alone in the small room at the back of the house, his bed cold and uncomfortable. The pastor's house that everyone envied from outside was actually a prison with invisible bars. Gideon moved through it carefully, like a man walking on broken glass barefoot. He prepared his own sermons quietly in the corner. He prayed silently, afraid even his prayers might anger her somehow. The walls witnessed everything, but said nothing. The neighbors heard nothing unusual and suspected nothing wrong. How did this marriage, this union that was supposed to reflect God's love, become a prison? What happened to turn love into fear? Many years ago, when they were both young and full of hope, Gideon married Elisheba for her beauty and her zeal for God. She was the most beautiful woman in 3 villages, with smooth skin and bright eyes. Her voice in worship made people cry with joy. The entire village celebrated them as chosen by God himself for special purpose. Old women danced at their wedding. Young girls envied Elisheba's luck. Pastor after pastor blessed their union with powerful prayers. Their wedding day was perfect in every single way. The sun shone brightly. The food was plenty. Everyone smiled and danced. But that night, their first night together as husband and wife, something small but significant happened. Elisheba looked at Gideon after the guests had left and said something strange. "Now you belong to me completely, and everyone will know it." Her tone was not loving, it was possessive, like someone claiming property. Gideon laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but her eyes did not laugh. That was the first crack in their foundation. That was when the beautiful picture began to show its hidden flaws. As months passed after the wedding, Elisheba began to realize something that disturbed her deeply. The villagers respected Gideon far more than they admired her beauty or her singing. When Gideon spoke during service, people listened with their whole hearts. When he prayed for the sick, healing happened. When he counseled troubled souls, they left with peace. But when Elisheba spoke, people were polite but not moved. When she sang, they clapped but did not weep. When she offered advice, they thanked her but did not follow. This reality planted a seed of envy in her heart, small at first but growing steadily. She tried to ignore it initially, pushing it down. But envy is like a weed, you cannot starve it easily. Soon she found herself comparing constantly. Why did God favor him more? Why did people seek him instead of her? Was she not beautiful? Was she not zealous? The questions multiplied in her mind daily. And instead of confessing this envy and repenting before God, Elisheba did something dangerous. She began to pray for control instead of contentment. She prayed for power instead of peace. One Sunday morning, a young widow named Naia joined the church congregation quietly. She wore simple clothes, nothing expensive or attention-seeking. She sat in the back, away from everyone's notice. Naia was gentle in her manner, kind in her words, and unnoticed by most people in the crowded church. She had lost her husband 2 years ago to a sudden illness, and grief had made her quiet. But though she appeared plain and ordinary to human eyes, something about her spiritual presence was radiant and pure. Her prayers, though whispered, reached heaven directly. Her worship, though quiet, pleased God deeply. She helped others without announcing it. She gave without expecting thanks. Gideon noticed this genuine light in her spirit during counseling sessions. He treated her with pastoral care and nothing more, but his eyes would sometimes linger just a moment longer than necessary when she spoke about faith. It was innocent, barely noticeable, but Elisheba noticed everything. She watched from across the room. She observed from the kitchen door, and something dark stirred inside her chest. Jealousy wrapped around her heart like a snake coiling around prey. Elisheba began speaking against temptresses during women's fellowship meetings every week. She quoted scriptures about dangerous women who destroyed godly men through their false gentleness. She warned wives to protect their marriages from wolves in sheep's clothing. And while she spoke these words to the entire group, her eyes would fix directly on Naia, who sat confused and uncomfortable. The other women noticed this strange focus, but said nothing aloud. They whispered to each other later in private. Naia felt the weight of those stares and accusations, but could not understand why. She had done nothing wrong. She had not spoken to no man inappropriately, but Elisheba's jealousy needed no evidence, only suspicion. Then, something happened that made everything worse. The church elders decided that Naia, because of her administrative skills from her previous job, should help Pastor Gideon organize church records and coordinate outreach programs. She would work closely with him twice a week in the church office. When this announcement was made publicly, Elisheba's face remained calm, but her hands gripped the bench until her knuckles turned white. That night, Gideon slept with both eyes open, sensing danger. During the next women's prayer meeting, Elisheba stood before the group and made a terrible accusation, disguised as concern. She claimed that Naia had been making advances towards Pastor Gideon during their work sessions together. She said she had witnessed inappropriate glances and suggestive words. She wrapped these lies carefully in spiritual language, claiming she was protecting the church from scandal and her husband from temptation. The women gasped in shock. Some believed immediately, others doubted but stayed silent. Naia was not present that day to defend herself. Elisheba prayed loudly afterwards, asking God to expose hidden sins and protect marriages from destruction. But this was the first time Elisheba deliberately lied to God and his people with full awareness. That night, as she slept, Elisheba heard a voice in her dream, low and rumbling like distant thunder. The voice did not speak words of comfort. It spoke a warning she could not fully understand, but felt in her bones. She woke up sweating, her heart racing violently. The room felt colder than usual. Something had shifted in the spiritual realm around her, and she knew it. Fear and desperation drove Elisheba to do something she had only heard whispered about in secret. She traveled alone to the forbidden forest of whispers, a place where ancient spirits were said to live and trade. Good Christians never went there. Pastors preached against it regularly. But Elisheba convinced herself this was necessary to save her marriage from destruction. The forest was dark even in daylight, with trees so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. She walked carefully, following the old path she had been told about. When she reached the clearing deep inside, she saw the altar made of stones covered in dried blood and strange carvings. The air felt heavy and wrong. She called out hesitantly, not sure what to expect. Something answered, not with sound exactly, but with presence. She felt eyes watching from every direction. A voice neither male nor female spoke directly into her mind. "What do you seek?" it asked. Elisheba swallowed hard and answered, "Control over my husband's heart and silence over his spirit." The presence laughed softly. "We do not deal in prayers here. We trade. The forest demands blood, not words." Elisheba hesitated for only a moment before agreeing to the terms. The spirit required a blood sacrifice, not human blood yet, but something living and innocent. She brought a white dove she had caught that morning. She performed the ritual exactly as instructed, speaking the words she was given, drawing symbols in the dirt with a sharp stick. As the dove's blood touched the ground, she felt something cold and heavy settle over her like a thick blanket. Power, dark and ancient, flowed into her hands. She spoke Gideon's name 3 times as commanded. She bound his will to her voice. She silenced his spirit from rising against her control. That night, far away in their home, Gideon experienced something terrifying. His dreams went completely dark, like someone had blown out every candle in his mind. He could not dream. He could not hear God's voice anymore in his prayers. A numbness spread through his soul that he could not explain. The spirit whispered one final warning to Elisheba before she left the forest. Control is not love. What you bind will eventually break, and when it does, the price will be yours to pay. She ignored the warning completely, blinded by her jealousy and temporary victory. In the weeks following the ritual, Gideon began to change in ways that disturbed those who truly knew him. He became hollow inside, obedient on the outside, but empty within. His sermons, though well prepared, lacked the fire they once carried. His prayers, though spoken correctly, felt mechanical and lifeless. People still came to church. The congregation actually grew in numbers, but the spiritual atmosphere felt wrong somehow, like fruit that looks perfect but has no taste. Gideon obeyed Elisheba without question now. When she told him what to preach, he preached it. When she told him who to counsel, he counseled them. When she told him to smile, he smiled. But his eyes looked distant, like a man watching his own life from far away. He had become a puppet with invisible strings. The joy that once radiated from him had disappeared completely. Church members asked if he was tired or sick. He assured them he was fine, but they sensed something unnatural was happening. Only one person seemed to truly understand. Naia, with her quiet spiritual sensitivity, sensed that something dark was wrapping around Pastor Gideon. She prayed for him silently, not knowing what else to do. Strange things began happening around Elisheba that she could not ignore or explain away. Her reflection in the mirror sometimes moved just slightly differently than her actual movements, like it had a mind of its own. When she prayed aloud, her words seemed to echo back to her unanswered, bouncing off an invisible wall. Children in the church would stare at her strangely and whisper to their mothers, asking why the pastor's wife looked so dark. The mothers would scold them for rudeness, but the children insisted something was wrong. Plants in her house began to wither and die even with proper care and water. Food she cooked tasted slightly bitter no matter how much sugar she added. At night, she would wake suddenly feeling like someone was standing in the corner watching her, but no one was ever there. Despite all these signs, Elisheba refused to acknowledge what was happening to her. She dismissed everything as coincidence or imagination. But there was one person she could not dismiss so easily. The village elder, an old woman named Mama Kemi, who had spiritual sight, began watching Elisheba very carefully during church services. Mama Kemi saw things others could not see, spiritual roots and connections that bound people together in darkness. Mama Kemi, who many called the river priestess because she understood both traditional ways and Christian faith, approached Elisheba one afternoon. She did not accuse or judge. She simply warned with a voice full of sorrow and wisdom. "Daughter, I see what you have done. Truth that is buried will rot the ground beneath your feet. What you plant in darkness will grow thorns that cut you first." Elisheba's heart jumped in fear, but she kept her face calm and acted offended. "What are you accusing me of, Mama Kemi? I am the pastor's wife. I serve God faithfully." The old woman shook her head slowly. God cannot be fooled with titles or positions. Roots buried deep will eventually break through the surface. Release what you have bound before it destroys you both completely. After Mama Kemi left, Elisheba felt genuine fear for the first time since entering the forest. But pride and jealousy still held her tighter than wisdom could reach. That same night, something unexpected happened. Gideon began dreaming again. For the first time in weeks, he saw images while sleeping. He dreamt of water, clear and flowing. He dreamt of someone washing his mouth open, cleaning out dirt he did not know was there. He woke up crying without understanding why. The dreams came to Gideon every night after that, growing stronger and clearer each time. He dreamt of drowning in dark water, then being pulled out into light. He dreamt of chains around his chest breaking piece by piece. He dreamt of birds trapped in cages suddenly flying free. Each morning, he woke up with tears on his face and a growing sense that something terribly wrong was happening to his life. He began to question things he had stopped questioning before. Why did he feel so numb inside? Why could he not hear God anymore? Why did his own voice sound like a stranger when he preached? The spiritual numbness that had covered him like thick fog was beginning to lift slowly. His mind, which had been locked tight, was starting to crack open. He found himself resisting Elishaba's commands in small ways, not openly, but internally. When she told him what to say, he hesitated. When she demanded obedience, he felt a flicker of defiance. Meanwhile, Elishaba sensed this change immediately. The control she had worked so hard to establish was slipping like sand through her fingers. She felt panic rising in her chest. The bond she created was weakening somehow, and she did not understand why. Her power was failing. Desperation drove Elishaba back into the forbidden forest of whispers a second time. This time, she went at night, when the darkness was thickest and most dangerous. She found the clearing more easily now, as if the path had widened to welcome her return. The spirits knew she would come back. They always did. She fell to her knees before the altar and begged for stronger power, tighter control, permanent binding. The voice that spoke to her was colder this time, amused by her desperation. You want more? Then pay more. The price doubles. This time we require not just blood, but something of your own. Elishaba did not even ask what that meant. She agreed immediately, blinded by her need to maintain control over Gideon. She cut her own palm with a sharp stone, letting her blood drip on the altar. She spoke the binding words again, but darker, stronger words this time. As she spoke them, she felt something being pulled out of her, something precious she could not name. Her reflection that night showed a face slightly older, slightly harder than before. She had paid without counting the cost, without understanding what she had truly given away. The spirit smiled in the darkness. The entire village prepared for the sacred river ceremony, an annual festival held by the water where truth was believed to flow freely and lies could not survive. It was a tradition older than the church itself, a blending of faith and culture that even Christians participated in. During this ceremony, people confessed wrongs, reconciled with enemies, and renewed vows. The village believed that living water blessed by God could wash away spiritual debt and expose hidden sins. Everyone would gather at the riverbank dressed in white. The pastor always stood at the front, leading prayers and blessings. This year, Elishaba insisted on standing directly beside Gideon publicly during the entire ceremony, holding his arm tightly. She told people it was to show unity in marriage, but the truth was different. She wanted to make sure he said nothing wrong, revealed nothing dangerous. She needed to control him, even in public, especially near the sacred water. The date approached quickly. The village buzzed with excitement and preparation, but some people, particularly Mama Kemi, watched Elishaba with growing concern. They sensed that something important would happen at the river, something that could not be stopped or hidden any longer. Truth was coming to the surface. The night before the river ceremony, tension filled the pastor's house like thick smoke. Elishaba could not sleep, pacing the floor restlessly. She felt her control slipping further, like trying to hold water in her bare hands. Meanwhile, Naia spent the night in prayer at her small home, not knowing exactly what she was praying for, but feeling led to pray nonetheless. She confessed nothing because she had done nothing wrong, but she prayed truthfully, asking God for whatever needed to happen. She prayed for Pastor Gideon's freedom without knowing he was bound. She prayed for truth to prevail without knowing lies had been told. Her prayers were pure and powerful, reaching heaven directly. That same night, Gideon felt peace for the first time in many months. Lying on his small bed, he felt something warm wash over him, like hands gently lifting a heavy weight off his chest. He breathed deeply and freely. His mind cleared completely. For the first time in many months, he remembered who he used to be before the numbness came. He did not understand what was happening, but he welcomed it. In the main bedroom, Elisheba noticed something terrifying. When she stood before her mirror, her shadow did not follow her movements properly. It remained still when she moved. It refused to obey her. The morning of the river ceremony arrived bright and clear. The entire village gathered at the river bank dressed in white as tradition required. The water flowed gently, sparkling in the sunlight. Pastor Gideon stood at the front with Elisheba gripping his arm tightly. He was supposed to lead the blessing prayer. As people sang traditional hymns and Christian songs together, the atmosphere felt heavy with expectation. Then came the moment when each person was to step into the shallow water to be blessed individually. Elisheba insisted on going first with Gideon right beside her. She stepped forward confidently, her white dress flowing, but the moment her feet touched the water, something happened that made everyone gasp. She collapsed suddenly, falling to her knees as if pushed by an invisible force. The water around her feet turned completely still, not flowing anymore, as if the river itself rejected her presence. The singing stopped. People stared in shock and fear. Elisheba tried to stand but could not. Her strength had left her completely. Then Mama Kemi stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice rang clear and strong as she spoke one sentence that changed everything. Elisheba, daughter of darkness, what have you brought into this holy place? The elder had spoken her hidden spiritual name aloud for all to hear. At that moment, the spiritual spell that had bound Gideon for so long broke completely and publicly. He felt it shatter inside his chest like glass exploding. His mind cleared instantly. His voice returned fully. His spirit, which had been chained and silenced, suddenly roared back to life. He stepped away from Elisheba, pulling his arm free from her weakened grip. For the first time in many months, Pastor Gideon spoke freely and truthfully before his congregation. His voice was strong but not angry, calm but not cold. My brothers and sisters, he began, I have been living in darkness while pretending to walk in light. My wife, through jealousy and control, used dark powers to bind my will and silence my spirit. I have been a prisoner in my own life, unable to speak truth or hear God clearly. But today, here at this sacred water, the chains have broken. The congregation stood frozen in shock. Elisheba, still kneeling in the water, began to scream. Not screams of pain, but screams of exposure. In her panic and fury, she began shouting about the forest, about the rituals, about the blood and the spirits she had called upon. She revealed everything herself, unable to stop the confession pouring from her mouth. The secrets of the forest of whispers spilled out before everyone. As Elisheba screamed her confessions in the river, the price of borrowed power came due immediately and publicly. Her beauty, which she had valued so highly and used so proudly, began to fade before everyone's eyes. Her smooth skin became lined and aged rapidly. Her bright eyes grew dull and tired. Her strong voice cracked and weakened until it was barely a whisper. She looked suddenly like a woman 20 years older than she actually was. The spirits she had made deals with were reclaiming their debt openly. What they had lent her, beauty, influence, control, they took back all at once. People watched in horror and pity as the transformation happened. Some wanted to help her, but most stepped back in fear. Mama Kemi explained to the confused crowd what was happening. This is what happens when we trade with darkness instead of trusting light. The spirits give nothing freely. What they lend, they take back with interest. Elisheba finally stopped screaming, too exhausted to continue. She looked up at the crowd with tears streaming down her aged face. She saw disgust in some eyes, pity in others, and fear in most. The village now faced a difficult decision. What do you do with someone who has sinned so terribly? Do you judge harshly or show mercy? Do you punish or forgive? Pastor Gideon stood before his wife, free now, but facing the hardest choice of his life. Every eye watched him, waiting to see what a man of God would do when betrayed so deeply. Anger would have been understandable. Revenge would have been tempting. Divorce would have been justified completely. The village expected harsh judgment, but Gideon surprised everyone. He looked at Elisheba with eyes full of sorrow but not hatred. He spoke quietly but clearly. What you did to me was evil. What you brought into our home was darkness. What you stole from me was precious. I will not lie and say it is okay. It is not okay. It will never be okay. He paused, letting those words settle. Then he continued, but I choose truth over bitterness. I choose freedom over revenge. I will not bind myself to anger the way you bound me with spells. You will face the consequences of your choices, but I will not be your judge. God is. He turned to the elders and said clearly, our marriage is over. I cannot remain bound to someone who chose darkness over repentance. But I will not curse her. I will not harm her. She must live with what she has done. It was not full forgiveness, but it was not cruel revenge either. It was moral clarity. It was redemption chosen over destruction. Elisheba was removed from her position as the pastor's wife immediately. The honor, the respect, the fear she once commanded, all of it vanished overnight, like morning mist. She moved into a small room in the compound of the church's messy house, where widows and struggling women lived together. She now lived among ordinary women, doing ordinary chores, receiving no special treatment. No one feared her anymore. No one sought her advice or approval. Children no longer greeted her with reverence. Women no longer competed for her attention. She was simply Elisheba now, not Mama Elisheba, not the first lady of the church, just a woman who had fallen from a great height to ground level. Some days she heard laughter coming from the women's fellowship meetings, the same laughter she had once envied when directed at others. Now she was on the outside looking in. She saw women praising each other freely without her controlling presence. She saw Naia, the woman she had tried to destroy, continuing her quiet service with even more grace than before. The irony was bitter. Everything she fought to keep, she lost. Everything she tried to destroy remained standing. This was her consequence. Not prison or death, but the loss of false glory she had never truly earned. Time passed slowly, bringing healing that could not be rushed or forced. Gideon took a long break from full pastoral duties to recover emotionally and spiritually. The church supported him with patience and prayer. Naia continued her work quietly, never pushing herself forward, never claiming anything. She did not pursue Gideon romantically or even hint at interest. She simply served faithfully and prayed consistently. Months turned to a year. Gideon slowly found himself again through prayer, counseling with Mama Kemi, and honest reflection. His voice in preaching returned with new depth, not from perfection, but from brokenness honestly faced. His relationship with God deepened because he had experienced darkness and chosen light again. Trust, which had been shattered, began to rebuild naturally, without manipulation or rushing. The village watched quietly as Gideon healed. They saw him smile genuinely again. They saw peace return to his eyes. And they noticed how Nalia's gentle presence brought him comfort without drama or demands. There was no scandal, no inappropriate relationship, nothing hidden. Just two people who had both survived pain, learning to trust again slowly. The elders watched carefully. The congregation prayed faithfully. And time, the great healer, did its quiet work in both their lives. The church that once was large and impressive became smaller and more intimate. Some members left uncomfortable with the scandal and the truth that had been exposed. Others stayed, but with different expectations. The building itself seemed less important now. What mattered was that pretending had stopped completely. No one wore masks anymore. No one pretended their marriages were perfect when they struggled. No one claimed spiritual heights they had not genuinely reached. The church became a place where truth was allowed to breathe freely, where weakness could be confessed without shame, where people helped each other honestly instead of judging secretly. Pastor Gideon preached differently now, with humility born from his own failure to see what was happening in his own home, with compassion born from experiencing bondage himself. The services were simpler, shorter, more focused on truth than on performance. And slowly, a different kind of growth began. Not growth in numbers seeking spectacle, but growth in depth among people seeking authenticity. One quiet evening after a simple prayer meeting, Gideon approached Naia. He had prayed about this for months. He had sought counsel with Mama Kemi. Now he asked her one honest question that contained no manipulation, no rush, no pressure. Would you walk with me? Not immediately, but when the time is right. As an equal, as a partner, as someone who understands brokenness. Naia did not answer immediately. She took time to pray, to seek God's guidance, to examine her own heart carefully. When she finally said yes, it was with clarity and peace. Their courtship was simple, public, and completely transparent. No secrets, no hiding, no rushing. The elders supervised. The congregation watched with approval. When they finally married, it was without spectacle or grand celebration. Just a small ceremony in the church with close friends and faithful members present. No expensive decorations, no elaborate clothing, no pretending this was a fairy tale. It was two broken people choosing to walk together honestly, building something new on a foundation of truth instead of appearances. Gideon did not promise perfection. Naia did not expect it. They promised honesty, mutual respect, and the courage to speak truth even when it was difficult. Their marriage was not held up as an example of perfection, but as an example of redemption and authenticity. People did not envy them. People respected them. There is a difference. From a distance, standing among the small crowd of women, Elisheba watched the simple ceremony. Her face showed complex emotions: regret, sorrow, acceptance. She did not disrupt or cause trouble. She simply witnessed what she had lost through her own choices. Then she turned and walked away quietly. The narrator's voice grows soft and wise, like an elder closing a sacred story by the fire. My children, this is the lesson that must be carried forward. A marriage is not holy because it looks perfect to outside eyes.
A marriage is not blessed because people praise it or envy it. A marriage is not strong because one person controls the other with fear or manipulation. A true marriage is holy because truth is allowed to breathe inside it freely. Because both people can speak without fear. Because weakness can be confessed and mistakes can be forgiven. Because power is shared, not hoarded. Because love is chosen daily, not forced through rituals or demands. Perfection is not the goal, authenticity is. Elisheba wanted control and glory. She received neither. Gideon wanted peace and truth. He found both, but only after losing everything false. Naia wanted nothing for herself. She received honor without seeking it. This is the way of the kingdom. Truth rises, lies fall, and authentic love outlasts false appearances every single time. The narrator pauses, then asks the final question that echoes in every listener's heart. What lesson did this story teach you? Would you have forgiven and walked away like Gideon did? Or would you have chosen differently? And in your own life, where are you choosing control over truth? Where are you pretending perfection instead of admitting brokenness? Think carefully, my children. Your answer matters more than you know.